Okay, I'm going to start. I hope everybody can join. So welcome everybody to the Chaplain York International Roundtable today. Today is the European session in English, focusing on global digital donor acquisition and how non-profits are growing income and loyal communities through digital channels. For those who didn't know, the roundtables began with our first international fundraising across borders, the IFAB event, and working out the 25-year history of working with organisations and not-for-profits who fundraise across the globe. We're actually doing it again this year in November, and tickets are now available. And it's going to be on the 16th to the 18th of November. So please have a look on the Chaplain York website for more details and sign up. So at IFAB, we gathered a huge amount of knowledge and information, and we wanted to share it. And out of that need to share, or that want to share, we have created the Chaplain York Roundtables. So today we're delighted to be joined by James Hirley, who's the Director of Digital Strategy and Transformation at Mindwise, Andrea Guzin, who's the NGO Product Marketing Manager at Salesforce, and Olivia Soure, who's the Human Rights and Social Change enthusiast. So I'll give a quick background on our panelists, and then we're going to move on to James's presentation, and then Andrea's going to share some insights with us as well, and Olivia's going to contribute his thoughts too. So our panelist is James. He is Mindwise's senior digital consultant. He spent more than 15 years in the not-for-profit space, and he's the brains behind groundbreaking digital acquisition campaigns for humans, dogs, dolphins, rights, reefs, and various other things. James has developed digital teams at NGOs, at Amnesty International and ActionAid, and agencies like the Pareto Fundraising, Mindwise in Australia and in Europe. He's held a range of roles from digital director to digital campaigner, producer and online marketer. There's not much that James doesn't know about digital fundraising. Andrea is also very experienced and is currently the product marketing manager at EMEA at salesforce.org. She spent 10 years working with hundreds of not-for-profits to grow their fundraising, and she started in the sector as an editorial assistant at the Not-for-Profit Quarterly, which is a great read if anybody has a chance to have a look. And then she continued her career in individual giving, working in not-for-profit agencies and several peer-to-peer and online platforms in Europe. She's a strong believer in the importance of individual giving and is an advocate for the value of gaining a deep donor understanding. Finally, but by no means least, is Olivia. He's a communication, fundraiser and digital specialist with 15 years of experience. He discovered his passion for digital at the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva, and he co-founded Humanium, sorry if I say that wrong. It's an international children's rights NGO with strong online presence of more than 4 million visitors per year on his website. He was in charge for 8 years on the digital transformation of Swiss Solidarity, the first fundraising platform in Switzerland, and transferred 30% of its donors online. So he knows what he's doing. He's also a lecturer in digital fundraising and at the HEG, which is the Geneva Management School, and is a lecturer in communications at University of Geneva. He's a human rights activist, a board member of Amnesty International Switzerland. So it's great to have all three speakers here and joining in the conversation. As I mentioned, each roundtable is hosted by Chaplain York, which I'm representing around the world. My name is Helen Maynard-Hill. I represent the Netherlands Foundation today. I'm British, but I've been living in the Netherlands for about 13 years, and I fundraise in the UK and the Netherlands and internationally. Although I'm the host, I'd like you and the panelists to do most of the talking. I'd like to encourage you to ask questions via the chat box, or please raise your virtual hand. I would also ask, if you are talking or asking a question, please switch your video on so we know who you are and we could put a face to the voice. Also, it's good to know we are recording the session, as some people who haven't been able to make it have asked for the recording to be sent to them. So if you don't want to appear on the video, then just let me know. Last thing, Chatham House rules apply, which means this is a trusted environment. So try to understand, and we're trying to understand and resolve any issues or complex problems that you might have. So really, I want to hand over to James, but please do raise your hand, put comments, be involved, because we want this to be a two-way interaction. So that's enough of me talking. James, over to you.
All right, thanks a lot for that great introduction, Helen. So look, we got together recently with the panelists and talked about what would be most useful to people for us to go through in this and form discussions around in this hour. And we came up with two main parts to today's session. The first is, of course, on digital donor acquisition, because that's how this has been advertised. So that's what you all signed up for. So we're gonna look at campaign models and particularly focus on two-step campaigns and direct donation, and then open the floor to Q&A and discussion. And really, I'm aiming to talk for maximum 10 minutes on this stuff. So I'm not covering it all deeply. I'm just aiming to touch on areas that might spark thoughts for discussion and questions. So please, like Helen said, bring all your questions out. And then for part two, Andrea from Salesforce was involved with in a fantastic study, the Global Fundraising Scorecard, with which Salesforce did with Next After, and Mindwise actually partnered with Salesforce and Next After in the Netherlands on that. And it pulled out some really great benchmarks and insights on how charities are doing with their digital fundraising across all channels. So, and Andrea is going to lead us through some key insights from that, and again, open the floor to discussion. So I'm going to go pretty quickly now, because I've got too much to get through in 10 minutes. So please just shout out if I'm going too fast, or if I'm being too Australian and not separating my words. Okay, so digital donor acquisition. Let's just start with a quick top line overview of models of digital donor acquisition. We thought we'd start there, just to sort of paint the landscape for people. There are a number of common models that nonprofits use, and they've all got their really unique characteristics and unique sort of drivers and motivations for response. So it's good to understand and be across these. The two that I'm going to unpack briefly today are two-step campaigning and direct donation campaigns, but there are also others like crowdfunding, peer-to-peer or community campaigns. Some charities have absolutely enormous peer-to-peer campaigns that bring in a lot of cash, but they're very different type of campaign to the others that we're looking at here. And also online events and galas. Now, to me, like I said, I'm going to focus on the first two. These are my areas of specialization. They're also generally the lowest barrier to entry. And two-step particularly is supportive of structural donor program development. So building your monthly or regular donor base, and that's a very important direction for a sustainable fundraising program that's having a long-term view. Okay, so two-step campaigns. I'm going to dive into this. So what is this two-step campaign? Okay, so on a basic level, a two-step campaign involves a first step, which is a non-financial engagement where leads are generated, and then a supported journey through to donor conversion, which is the second step. That is the basic level of a two-step campaign. And there are many different types of action that we might present to generate leads. So something like a brochure download, like this one from the Thrombosis Foundation in the Netherlands, a quiz like this one from Bush Heritage in Australia, an educational online game like this one from the Heart Foundation in the Netherlands, a petition like this one from Soydog, or a hand raiser, or in this case, a paw raiser, which Mindwise did for Animals Asia last year. And there are lots of other possibilities. And we really call these two-step campaigns at Mindwise instead of just focusing on the lead generation, because it's really important that charities think of the whole journey, the whole supported journey through to donor conversion and after donor conversion, what people are going to receive after that, rather than just focusing on lead generation. I've seen some tragedies of enormous viral lead generation with no plan afterwards, where leads just go cold because there wasn't a plan. So in terms of that supported journey, let's look at it. There's really a lot of choice in how you do this stuff, and there's no one size fits all. You can have a simple supported journey. Here's one of those, where advertising on Facebook and Instagram through Facebook Ads Manager, we're driving people to a Facebook lead form. So that's a data capture mechanism within Facebook. So you're not setting up any web pages or anything like that. After you collect your leads, you send them through to a telemarketing program to get called and asked for a monthly gift. And it's good practice to thank them for what they've done in that lead form as well. So that's a really basic supported journey for a two-step campaign. A more advanced one, and don't worry if this is overwhelming. If it's the first time you've seen this, it probably is. And that's okay. The main impression is just for you to understand it can get complex. For a more advanced one, we've got 2 landing pages built on a website or a microsite, a lead generation page, let's call it a petition like this soy dog one, and the donation page where people get converted. Now we drive traffic to that petition from a number of different channels, not just one, but a range of different channels, including search if it's search relevant. And then after people fill in the petition, they actually go on a journey. We actually try to convert them via a number of different channels with the same messaging at the same time. So they get asked immediately on the thank you page to donate. We retarget them with advertising. They do go into phone conversion. That's always where you're going to get most of your donor conversion. And they go on an email conversion journey where there might be 5 or 6 emails with delays in between. Each email has its own specific role. If you're interested in that, we can talk about that in the question time. And of course, if people hit the donate page and they convert or they don't convert, we've also got a plan for both of those scenarios. So simple or complex, which journey do you choose? There's no right or wrong. It really depends on your needs and objectives. But I would say one really important recommendation, make sure you test your lead gen campaign ideas in a light, cheap MVP sort of way, like this one over on the left side first, before rolling out and investing a whole lot more, because you might think it's a great idea and you launch it in market and the audience doesn't agree with you. I've seen plenty of those. I've been involved in some. So we've developed a model where rather we do a multivariate test campaign first and then roll out what is proven in data. Okay, I'm going to really skip over the next few slides and I'm just going to make a few key points, right? Why two-step campaign? Why two-step campaigning? Well, if you think about it, let's say a campaign, we generate 10,000 leads. We might convert 500 of those leads straight up to being donors, but that 9,500 that don't convert immediately, they're still in your community. You've collected them, they're in your email list, you're talking to them on social, and you have they should be seen as your future donors, right? So if you just acquire 500 donors direct to donation, that's great, but you've got 500 people to develop into the future as opposed to this 10,000 here on the right. So that's a big kicker, and that community really should be seen as future donors. And to summarize this slide in 10 seconds, we did a study that proved that, right? So proved that basically we took an organization we've been doing lead gen with for many years, and we looked at when people donated vis-a-vis compared to their initial date of lead acquisition. And there's a big peak immediately when we're calling them and and they're on the email journey, of course. But then you have people making a first-time donation 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 weeks later. So that proves that value of that community that you acquire. We can come back to that if you've got questions. And the other thing about two-step campaigns is they really can and should deliver on objectives across your organization. It's not just a fundraising campaign, ideally. It can help with core programs, especially if you do advocacy or you've got an issue you want to push with policy. Helps with brand and issue awareness. Things like volunteer recruitment, we can weave that into the supported journey if that's an objective as well. So we can do a lot with these campaigns. It's not just about fundraising. Okay, now I'm just going to make a couple of points about direct to donation and then move on to any questions or discussion. So yeah, direct to donation, it's pretty much what it says on the tin. We're asking people directly to donate, and if it's an acquisition context, then we're reaching out to them probably via advertising. Here's an example of a campaign that we've got running live now for Orbis. This is one ad creative on the left. It's driving people to donate to a landing page on the right. We're serving it to various audiences. So this ad looks really simple, but it's actually very effective direct response fundraising, and it's based on a really solid understanding of Facebook ad creative and how to optimize all of these different elements, these different text elements and visual elements that we've got going on. So this is, I'm going to make a point, like my closing point about direct to donation campaigns, and it applies to lead generation as well, is about understanding audience, the sort of tools and tactics that we have for defining audiences online and why that's important. So this is a screenshot that we've got running in a current Facebook campaign that we're doing. It's actually a lead generation campaign, this one, but it's the targeting options that I'm displaying are the same for whatever objective your campaign is. So in this, we've got audiences that are formed in a whole lot of different ways. We've got a lookalike of website visitors. So we say, right, people who have visited your website, and you can say people who have spent over a certain amount of time on your website or visited a number of pages in the last X days, 180 days, whatever, they are inherently interested in your cause. So we can find people who look like those, so who share their characteristics. Lookalikes are a very, very powerful tool in targeting right now to reach out to new people. Another lookalike audience, but in this case, we're targeting lookalikes. We're building a lookalike based on campaign leads. So we've acquired a whole lot of leads through this campaign. Now we want to find people who look like those leads. So that's always a smart thing to do. Interest-based. So we've got a couple of interest-based audiences. One that's broadly based, interested in Christianity or in child charities, rights and protection, that sort of thing, aid development and rights charities. Warm online community. So here we're just targeting people who have interacted with us on social media, who are on the email list, these sorts of things. And I go and broad as well. So right, let's benchmark all these audiences against just a broad people who are age 40 and above in our target geography. And it's important. It's really important to understand these tactics. It's getting quite tactical, but this sort of planning and understanding of the audience variables that we have to play with in online advertising campaigns will make or break your campaign. So, and you can think of some of those audience examples I just went through. Some of them are focusing on audiences that are already qualified to a degree. For example, retargeting, so targeting people who have been on your website, or targeting people who have engaged with your content on Facebook or Instagram, or targeting a list of people that you have already. You can upload that list to Facebook. And some audiences really are cold, but they are otherwise well qualified. And like I said, lookalikes, or if you've got, if you can get a third-party list from a broker, something like that. Okay, that was a bit of a rush through audiences, but I just wanted to see if that sparked any discussion or questions. And yeah, I think at this point we wanted to open to see if there are any, do people have any experiences that they can share on any of this, or any questions?
I think that's a whistle-stop tour, right, of digital fundraising. I have got one question from the floor. Is it possible to share some of these slides, James, afterwards? I'm happy to distribute if you're happy to share the slides.
No problem.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I'll send them out afterwards. So yeah. We did have one question from Matthew Webb. Matt, do you want to say it, or do you want me to read it out for you? I can see.
Oh, maybe if you read it out, because I can't remember quite which one the question that was. I've got another question, but yeah.
Okay. So your first question was Matt's about to launch the first non-UK based fundraising office, right? Oh yeah, he says in Australia. That was the one. What extent would you encourage them, the Australian office, to develop their own web presence apart from the international one? So it's kind of, I guess, about almost like a branding question, I suppose, or how separate do you think that it should be? Is that kind of summarizing your question?
Yes, and just thing to add in is, it's when I say office sounds very grand, it's like one half-time person. So mainly I want them to be fundraising rather than doing loads of tech stuff, if you sort of mean. So in a way, some ways, the obvious thing would seem to be, okay, they just piggyback on our digital presence and not try and develop their own. But I'd be really interested if you've got a view on that, James, or any of the panel actually. Or is this just for James at this stage?
No, it's for everybody.
Okay, right. Okay.
James, do you want to kick off, and then we'll go to Andrea and then Olivia?
Look, I was going to say I've just spoken a fair bit, so I'm happy to hear. I do have opinions on that, but I'm happy for one of the other panelists to lead as well.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah. All right, Olivia, go on.
I would say it just mainly depends on what are your objectives and what are your constraints. So if you want to develop a strong fundraising presence in Australia, and you need Google to identify your website to be in Australia, you need a separate website, for example. If you want to move to digital fundraising, targeting Australian people, yes, you need that. But at the beginning, for example, if you're going to target institutional donors or something like that, it's not the first step that you want to implement. So having a dedicated space on your current website dedicated for that country would be probably easier. So it really depends on what are your objectives and where you are in your priorities.
Oh, that's interesting. A dedicated page where all the donations are in Aussie dollars and it's people feel it's for them. Yeah, okay. Rather than just our general page, our general donation page.
We find that a lot. Yeah, we find. Sorry, just to jump in. We find that a lot with European, like euros and pounds, actually. So people are kind of, especially with the exchange rate as well. So I think the more that you, again, like Olivia said, I think it comes down to identifying the, your objectives and what your kind of strategy is. But I think people are very conscious about, well, if the donation's given in, pounds or euros and they're in Australia, then it kind of seems, a bit obtuse, really. So Andrea, would you want to add to that?
I think just in my experience when we opened new offices, I agree with Olivia. If you really want to make your revenue coming from digital, you will need to think about those digital constraints. But generally, when we opened a new office, and it depends on the country, you have a certain amount of time. You can do lots of fundraising without being restricted by any of the 25% ROI rules. So what we would used to do is first sort of scope out if it would work in that country with doing like a fundraising circle just for major donors. If that was successful, some of that revenue was used to invest in digital and other methods. And then we would start out with something very simple. So take suppliers that are already existing in the market, use their donation pages, build their landing pages. Don't build an entire website because everybody knows how much time and editorial approval that will need. But just use those kind of things to test out, like basically like a proof of concept, what we would call in product design, to test out, are you getting traction? What is working in this market that isn't working in the UK? I mean, and based on those data, you can make data-driven decisions on if a website would be sustainable solution for you, because a website building is one thing, maintaining it is a whole other ballgame.
Yeah, good point. I think people forget that, right? And I hate going to websites where it's, there's a blog from 2017 or something, and you're like, yeah, it's always a bit awkward. Matthew, are you okay if we come back to you, because Adrian's got a question? Is that all right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
We'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Helen. Just a quick one from me. You made a reference to third-party lists in terms of donor acquisition. I can't remember whether they are now illegal under the new fundraising regulation in the UK. Is that something that can be used in the UK or not?
Yes, reference to like GDPR, do you mean?
Well, no, the new fundraising regulator came in a few years ago, and I think third-party list sharing was banned, if I'm rightly.
I'll share my experience with them at present. So we're using them via a vendor in the US right now. Okay. So yeah, I'm not sure about whether they're available. I did actually ask that vendor about availability in some other markets previously, and they weren't available, but I don't know if it was because of for legal reasons or just they didn't have that product there. And it's an interesting point. When I do say third-party lists, I'm talking about Facebook custom audiences that have been created by that vendor and then shared on to the charity or the agency that's working with the charity for deployment in campaigns. So it's not actually data that we ever receive. We never receive any. It's hashed data. It's encrypted data. It's an encrypted audience that we can target that has some characteristics that we've agreed on beforehand.
Got you. Yeah. Okay, that makes all the difference. Thank you.
Cool. No problem.
I guess you get around GDPR laws as well then, I suppose. Olivia and Andrea, have you got any comments on that, on lists?
I mean, if you look where the future is going, it's going to be first-party consent more and more. So I think one thing that we as a sector should maybe look at is that overall the average rate is 20% retention. So I think whoever you get in the door, make sure that they stay, because I do see a general, if we look at the court cases currently that are pending around GDPR, or even if we take the UK, where we're not really quite sure what we're going to get, I would really build your strategy towards that, because that's the trend that we're seeing overall globally. I mean, there's also, no matter where you are, there are more legislations coming. We're just dealing with one in Japan right now. So like, if you can build that first party consent with your donors and supporters, I think that's the ideal way to go. So it's much more about community building and having people with you for a longer time that really understand and live also your cause, and maybe also are willing to open their networks to your organization.
It's that whole relationship building, isn't it? I guess, right?
Can I make that link? Can I make the link back to two-step campaigning and lead generation then? Because I hate the term lead generation because it sounds like this horrid commercial thing. For me, it's actually community building, but the market, people understand the term lead generation. That's where, that's exactly what you're pulling people into your community via a cause-based action that they really feel and align with, and they enter your community then, and they hand over their data to you. So like, yeah. That really fits in the picture that Andrea was just describing there.
Thank you both. That's very brilliant. Thank you.
Olivia, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add exactly the same thing that added James. It's really those basic things. You have to think now of digital campaigns, donor acquisition, not as a standalone strategy or tactic, but really it's integrated. And you have to integrate then the fundraising to your communication, to your campaigns if you're doing advocacy and so on. And this is really the future, integrating all this together, because the people that will donate to you are the people that have a relationship to your cause and to you, and it's not a third-party listing. This is not quality fundraising.
Yeah,
thank you.
Agreed. Great, thank you. Matthew, have you got your second question?
Yeah, I've got loads, but I'll just I've got one that's just on my mind about. I'm really interested in this two-step process. And you mentioned, James, that one of the methods of lead generation was a questionnaire, and which I'm very excited about that. And actually, I've got a particular audience that are all. I'm working for a Buddhist charity. They're all Buddhists. They're all already keen, and I've got some good questions I could ask about practicing Buddhism under COVID, etc. But the slight problem I've got internally is that my programs team don't really want the answers to those questions, that questionnaire, if you see what I mean. They say, no, we've already got our other, strategy-led basis on which to prioritize projects. We don't really want to be donor-led on this. So I want to ask the questions as a way of generating interest and in your terms, leads for a big campaign we're about to launch. But I'm sort of left slightly with almost kind of awkward kind of, I don't know if it's a moral question quite, but like asking questions, are the answers actually going to be used particularly? Do you see what I mean? I can see the purpose for us of asking the questions to engage the donors or potential donors, but what about this? Yeah, you probably understand the question by now. Are the answers actually going to be used? Probably not. Does that, how do I square that somehow?
Who are you asking?
Oh, I was pointing towards James just because he'd spoken about questionnaires, but it could be any of the panel actually.
Okay.
I think you're on mute, James.
You're on mute, James.
2021, hey. Okay. Let me kick off, because this is one that we deal with a lot, and I think coming from our perspective, we reached the same challenge. But from my perspective, when I'm creating these campaigns, I'm trying to build maximum theory of change or impact. So the strongest narrative, and particularly on the landing page in the communications, that says to the audience, if you take this action, it's going to it's going to go somewhere. There's a reason, and we always want to make that as strong as possible. And like, we work with some organizations and teams, like you say, that where there's resistance and pushback. So with this campaign, this was a big medical research organization. We wanted to say, okay, we want to do a poll on childhood vaccination, which is a very hot topic in, this is pre-COVID, but a very hot topic in Australia, childhood vaccination somehow. So we're asking people, this organization works on vaccines, and we want to ask people what they think about vaccines. And, just honestly, we're targeting people who are probably going to support vaccines, and that sort of work. We wanted to say, right, we want the story, what we want to tell the public is we're going to take this information and we're going to craft it into a release and have a press strategy and do some work with it. And there was a lot of pushback because this is a serious scientific organization that spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year on research. And that part of the organization said, no way can you call what you're doing. So it's the same challenge that we reach again. I think, in your case, I think what the organization needs to understand is that it is very practical and important to ask your supporters and potential supporters what they think and what they care about, and how they think about the things that you're talking to them about. And it is very practical. And at a minimum, you can say that it is going to help your organization in your work, like plan for the future and understand what's important to the community so that you can shape your programs and communications according to that. That's like a minimum, I think you can say, and then you could build on top of that. But yeah, I think it sounds like internal education is needed there. Yeah.
Olivia, you got anything to add? Andrea?
I mean, I think this is the interesting thing even about COVID, because you have this meme that's going around who did the digital transformation at your nonprofit. Was it the COE, the CIO, or was it COVID? And I think that's one of the things we come across the most. That's actually hardest to change the people internally in the organization that are maybe not directly linked to fundraising. What I've found there is what we teach or what we do ourselves in our work as fundraisers about marketing automation and building journeys and messaging actually really works well in the organization as well. So if you take them through that journey of why that should be interesting, because to us it's, obvious, right? Like supporters, we should understand them, it's important. But to somebody who's maybe with their whole day in medical research, or my husband is a engineer at a nanotechnology facility. For him, he doesn't understand why that would be important. And so take them through that journey and build a stakeholder register. Keep in mind who needs to know what and what is the thing that they would be interested in learning more on, because everybody has something that they're going for. So generally what we find, all people in the organization want more impact. All of them want more raise more money for the cause. So try to find those common points and build a journey. Like messaging in the end of the day is just communication with each other. So I think that's something that you need to put a little bit of thought in, but it so far in our experience has created good success. And we are talking sometimes about a year or two, but you're doing it for the long haul and for more impact for your organization.
Thank you all. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
I think as well, if you kind of have that internal education, it helps for the people, the internal people inside to kind of understand fundraising. Because I think a lot of time, especially like programmatic people or advocacy or don't actually understand what fundraisers do or what the importance is. So I think if you help to build that understanding about why that's important and why the donors are important, then I think overall it will help generally, I think, as well. So great. I've got other questions, but maybe we need to move on to Andrea's presentation, and then we can take some more questions after that. Is that all right, Andrea, if you want to share your screen?
I think actually we can jump in sort of to Matthew's question in a way.
Yeah. It's a good link.
Yes. So James already told us, and again, thank you, James, for taking part with us in this study. We do multiple studies with Next After, and this one was global. And it's a huge data set. It's literally monstrous. It took us over a year to compile. So please make use of it. It's available for free online on globalonlinefundraising.com. What we did in 9 countries, in the end, we had 630 organizations, but we started with 100 organizations per country, 585 online donations. So we donated Salesforce money, which was lots of fun, $20, 20 pounds, 20 euros, whatever the currency of that country was, to 585 organizations, and signed up to 535 email newsletters of nonprofits. So there was a whole lot of data coming from that. Now you're going to ask, what was the outcome? What is it actually like to be a donor, and what are organizations doing? And so this is why I'm saying I'm linking to Matthew. Maybe just have one of those people make a donation and do the actual mystery donor experience that we had, because you can take those touch points to continue the conversation. So this is a tool to improve rather quickly your online fundraising and raise more money, but it's also an internal enablement tool. So first, and this is the basic of the basic, and everybody who I tell this to, test your forms integrations. Don't do this just at the beginning, do this regularly, have a process that you test it. Asks me, yes, of course, but we had a lot of money to spend, but we could not sign up for email successfully 27% of the time, and we could not complete a donation 20% of the time. Now, we wanted to account for the fact that many organizations are resource strapped in COVID. This research was planned before we knew a pandemic was going to hit. So all organizations in the study in Europe were above 10 million in revenue, and outside of Europe were above 5 million in revenue. So Brazil and Mexico, we took it a little lower. So what does this actually mean, and why does this happen? Why can't we donate 20% of the time? It's actually pretty simple. It seems that when the form is implemented, people check it, but there's no check afterwards. So for our mystery donors, of which I think one of James' team members was one, we could not find out where to donate in the first place. So it's a basic website issue. The credit card was not accepted, and we did account for local payment methods. So in Holland, we made a little exception there, and outright the form was just broken. So you would have a 404 error. Also for the sign up, it was the same experience. And what we found there really interested. So when you go to the website, and when you do that to almost any nonprofit website, you go down, and at the footer, you see this little bar where you can enter your email address. And it seems like the entire sector has just copied each other there. There's no value in exchange for why I should fill my email address there. Now we have, obviously, as James alluded to, other ways to generate emails and their landing pages, but the most obvious way, and actually the way that you get the supporters that are strongly aligned with your cause, is on the website, because they make the effort to go to your website, scroll all the way down, and actually fill in their email address. So those are donors that are probably really interested in hearing from you. So what we saw there is that actually there you could provide much more value just by adding a little text. Why should I give my email address to you? What will I get in the newsletter? So we saw some really great examples of organizations explaining about exclusive content and unique content that they would offer in that newsletter, which increased the number of signups significantly. But we also saw that nonprofits don't use enough other forms of content. So when I was still working with many of those organizations directly, they used to have huge amount of pictures and great stories to tell. I was always so excited to go through it. But a lot of that is just on a server somewhere, or if you're really unlucky, it's in a database file, and they don't use it. You could use it for an ebook, you could use it for an online course. There's many ways to use and repurpose content. And please use what you already have. There's no need to create net new content, because it's most likely that most of your supporters haven't seen it. And if they're like me, I'm aging a little, maybe they have seen it, but they don't remember. So what we saw is really there's more opportunity there for the sector, and this is something you can already do this week. So the third thing, and James also alluded to this, is present a clear next action to take and do more cultivation. So if you saw the little graph that James presented, yes, of course, there is a peak at the beginning, but actually donors will be willing to donate for quite a long time after. I think the trick there really is just to keep them engaged or cultivate them, as we say in the emailing world, but it's really just relationship building, as we discussed earlier. So 7 in 10 organizations had no immediate step for a new email subscriber to do. Sometimes they didn't even receive a confirmation or a thank you. So when you test today your donation form and your email subscription on your website, think about what do you want the donor to do after they sign up. Usually what we see is a lot of systems are still siloed. So what happens sometimes, someone will subscribe, but that list won't be imported manually into the newsletter list until a month later, when that person has already forgotten that they signed up. And so when we take some of the country data, you can look at the country that's relevant to you. We see that the UK has the highest percentage of organizations that actually offer the next step, which was usually social share. So follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, any of the new ones, while Australia had the lowest. And the other next action was to read an article, so a referral to a blog or something that was on the website. So I'd like to take it back again to our discussion and also what James said about two-step donations. So we have an offer. We promote it on Facebook ad, I don't know, we see even LinkedIn ads these days or in any other kind of promotion form. And what do we do next? So it's important here, I think, to really think about this total journey and where they can drop off, because we see huge percentages between each of these yellow arrows. There's a lot of improvement. And even if you increase it with 5%, that already means a whole lot more revenue. So once they hit your donation page, that became really interesting. We saw that if you're doing the direct to donation that James related, there's still a lot of friction. So 95% of organizations have some form of friction. Now, what is friction? We define it as anything that prevents the person to make a donation. So it can be distracting links leading to other sites of the website instead of the donation. It can be anything that means that the donation doesn't go through, so that we couldn't actually complete it. It can also be that the form is 7 steps long and you have to fill all of your personal information until the name and date of birth of your children. It is quite varied across country what they want to ask, and some of it is related to legal or even to language. So as Olivier knows, in French, you need to know if somebody is female or male for the language purpose. So when you address somebody, you need to know if you say cher or chère. But other than that, we see a lot of information that you actually don't need right away. You could capture later, such as a phone number, birthday, or gender. If your primary objective is to capture information and not to get a donation, yes, you can keep that on the form. But if your primary objective is to get the donation, then don't put more friction than is necessary on the form. And so when we look, 30% of organizations require the phone number, which is most common in France and then Australia. So we have the donation, we signed up to the newsletter. What's next? Does cultivation really matter? Is it really important? So what we saw is that only 3 in 10 organizations sent an email that we call a cultivation email. So something where there's not a direct ask for a donation to the donor after 60 days. And we're not quite sure what happened after 90 days because we followed all communication for 3 months, but it dropped significantly to the point that we were actually really surprised. So 3 in 10 organizations sent at least 1 cultivation email to the online donor beyond 60 days. So thank you for your donation, but after that, crickets. So it really, especially in Germany, actually, it was really interesting to see you will get the donation, but then the relationship ends. And why is this important? Well, we see more and more organizations that are building welcome journeys or that are thinking about how often to send out communication. So we did a very, very simple experiment thanks to Next After, did this done with their research laboratory. And we just added one more email to a journey. What would that actually mean? And this is a great one to bring in front of your board or your programs team who's telling you that you're communicating too much or that they think that it should be different, because this is pure science. If you do one more email, in 60 days, you have 54% more engagement, so more clicks, more sharing of the article, anything that we indicate as interacting with the content. And you will have 42% more revenue. And so the question is really not how often should you communicate? The question is, what do you communicate? Because you can communicate every day if what you're bringing to your donor is relevant to them. I actually have a former university that sends me really funny memes and I open them every day. You can communicate once a year, but if you send me a newsletter that's the size of 7 books, I probably won't open it anymore the third or second time. So how do you make those welcome journeys? Even if you're 1.5 persons strapped in Australia, it's relatively easy. The majority of the work is at the beginning, where you have to define what you put in those emails. This is just an example. As James knows, my favorite slogan, I think maybe even Olivia knows that, is test, test, test. So make sure that what you put in place in the beginning is not something that's going to stay there for the next 10 years. Things change, pandemic hit, other things come into play. But this is definitely something that you can put in place if you're one person in an office and let it run for at least a couple of months so that you can focus on other things. So this is my last lesson, and we're going to conclude. Make emails more personal to the subscriber and the donor. And that's really a personal plea of mine. I have very personal cause that I'm supporting because in my family we have a DNA piece that's wrong, and they found a solution to it. The research was found, and I was so excited that my donations actually made an effort to get medical research to do this. Only I never heard about it because the subject line of the email was newsletter 234, and it was addressed to Sir Andrea Gusino, because apparently Andrea can also be indicated as a male. So make sure that your communication, and technology makes this really easy these days, is personalized. We found that in our study, over half of emails to the email subscriber did not mention their name. And so some of this has to do with capture. If you don't ask for their name, you're not going to have it in your systems. And there's no research, and Next After has done hundreds of experiments on this that indicate asking for the name will decrease the number of leads you will capture. It actually seems to increase it by a little bit. So please make sure that your form has also a field for the name. And then that's just the email newsletter subscriber. So maybe we don't have their name and we have to say dear supporter or some other form of addressing them. But for donors, you will always have their name because it's a legal requirement to fill your name when you donate. You have that 1% that's doing it anonymous, but generally you will have their name. 69% of emails to the donor, so to our mystery donors, did not include their name. Now, if we look at why this is, we generally hit systems. So one system has to import in the other, or it's too much work because it doesn't work with this specific kind of tool. Somebody might not just know it. Maybe we just want to send out all the content we have at once, and we feel it's better to do that in a very generic newsletter. But if we look at pure data, and if we want to make our decisions based on data, we see that if the email is personalized, and even if that's just the name, so you don't have to tell me that my favorite color bike is blue, but it's just the name, you're going to get 270% more engagement with your content. And more engagement with your content means generally also more conversion. And it means that more people learn about what you're doing and the impact that you're making. So I'm hitting the end of my presentation. the last part I want to say is a lot of organizations like to talk from the organization. We're hitting an era which I used to already say with one of the questions, where it's first party consent. And that means that you have a first party relationship, and that's generally also with a person. So not just with an organization. And all of the research in the Next After database, and you can also submit your test there, shows us that if you send the email from a person, so that can be Matthew Webb, at Buddhist organization, or it can just be Matthew Webb, which seems to work even better, apparently, will perform much better because people want to have relationship with persons or with organizations. So we see the 3 types here in Australia. Good timing, right, James? And we see that the person only generally performs the best. Again, I'm going to stick with my slogan, test, because those things generally vary a little bit across countries, but in the end, it seems also pretty obvious. I like it when I get an email from James or from Olivier, not necessarily from that organization there at that moment in time. So I'm going to conclude, say big thanks again to Mindwise and all the other partners we had helping us in this research. We needed local partners to do the donation because that increases your acceptance rate of credit cards. So I'm just putting that hint out there too. And we're going to continue with this research. So if you have any suggestions on further questions you have or more research that you want to see, we're currently doing one that includes both donors, beneficiaries, volunteers, and any type of other supporters, so petition signers or advocacy people. And we're getting quite interesting results, so please reach out or go to salesforce.org. And if you want to study, all data is openly accessible. If you're a data nerd like me, you can play around. So that was it. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. Super interesting. Loads of good tips, I think, to take from that. And I agree with you personally. If I get an email saying, "Dear Mrs. blah 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 blah, give me money," no, I just think it's just laziness, actually. You know, so why should I bother? You haven't invested in me and finding out who I am. Why should I invest in you? So, yeah, I think that's a good tip. I think that's great. Please do. We're running a bit out of time, but we do have some time for some questions. So please, like I say, raise your hand or put it in the comments box. But one thing I kind of wanted to touch on was about budget, and it's always a tricky one for lots of organizations. And I know from different organizations I've worked with that often digital and online has kind of taken a sideline to the more sort of traditional fundraising areas, I guess. I think that's changing with the COVID and everyone getting more kind of tech savvy and becoming, but one question to everybody actually is, how do you convince your board or the money holders, the people that hold the purse strings, how do you convince them to invest in digital? Like, how do you demonstrate the ROI? I mean, I think there's quite a lot of data out there now, which is great, but if I'm a small organization, I want to do digital online, I know I need to invest. How do I convince my board? Olivia?
I would be happy to answer because I only have 2 minutes left before I need to jump into another meeting. I would say first, you need to understand what means digital for your organization, for who you are. Because digital has not the same impact on your organization, the same role, depending on what you are doing, what is your cause, what is the way you fundraise. For example, the benchmark in Switzerland, they say 2% of the fundraising is done on digital channels, between 2 and 3. It's not true. It really depends on who you are. If you are working in humanitarian settings, emergency appeals, it can be up to 30, 40, 50% of your appeal raised through digital. If you are doing like child sponsorship programs, like Plan International in France or something like that, their recruitment is made more than half of it on digital channels. So it really depends on who you are, because digital has a different place depending on your organization and your profile and the type of fundraising you're doing. So this is really an understanding strategically what position is it for you. And then you can go into testing what Andrea says, because it's all about testing.
Yeah, agreed. Good point. I want to jump to the next question. Oh, James, do you want to make a point?
Sorry. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make it really quickly. So I agree absolutely with what Olivia said, and just to take it one step further, that when people point to what channel transactions are completed on, that is a really shallow and uninformed way to analyze what channels contribute to fundraising, and it's a real problem when that's the extent of the analysis. So if people hear something about a brand or an organization and they have a question about it, what do? They pull out their phone and they tap it into Google, and that's like 90% of people. That's exactly what they'll do. Your website matters there, and there are so many, like your socials matter for the same reason. Your email program for the reason Andrea mentioned earlier. It's a way of keeping in contact with people and maintaining them and building the relationship. So all those things support what may in the end be a direct mail donation, or or whatever. So that's also really important. So these sorts of things, these boards who are making these decisions, they need to understand it, and so they need to understand that, and then they also, hopefully, they're making data-driven decisions. So they need to be presented with the data that in a way that they'll understand.
Okay, great. I want to jump to the next question. That's great. Thank you, James. About because we are running a short time, and something that Andrea touched on about phone numbers, and also Matthew's asked the question about if you cut out the phone number from the questionnaire and your data sourcing, how do you get the info for the telephone up? I was also going to add to that as well, like how do you then communicate on platforms like WhatsApp if you don't have the telephone number? So is that not quite an important field to gain data on, Andrea?
I mean, I think it really depends. So my first answer is test it. If it does significantly reduce the number of donations that you get, and you think that is because of that phone number field, then it's a question of numbers. So what we generally do is can be a very simple thing. So the thank you page, you can ask also questions on, process the transaction, but then on the confirmation, ask if they would be willing to do it, and maybe give some incentive why they should give their phone number. The other thing is you can balance out two campaigns. So maybe one, you really want to talk to them, and you want to have a journey where you actually talk to them on the phone, but maybe with the other campaign, you just want, oh, sorry to say, but you just want to donate. And the third option that we generally do is just a marketing journey. So build 3, 4, or 5, where at different points you will ask, because obviously you won't get the same completion of everybody filling their phone number right from the start. But if you build a journey, you have no extra work, and eventually you will also reach about 60 to 70% filling their phone number. To be fairly honest, those that don't fill their phone number also just really don't want to be called.
Good point. Really good point. We've run out of time. There was so much information in there. I want to thank James and Andrea, and also everybody else for attending, for taking the time. I think there's so much information there. I will be able to share James's slides, because there's lots of information for us to learn there. Andrea, I'll send the link as well so they can download the content from the research information. I'll be sending a questionnaire out as well, because we're always interested, like we talk about questionnaires, always interested to get your feedback. We are running roundtables in the new year. I think this is going to be, oh no, there's one more next month on tax. So you will be getting information about that, which is exciting, fun times. So October is going to be that, and then November is going to be the IFAB event. Then we take a break, and then we relaunch the roundtables in the new year in the spring. So yeah, please fill in the questionnaire. We always love to hear what you think, what was good, what wasn't so great, what we can improve, and also ideas moving forward for the future. So once again, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you again to James and Andrea for a super interesting hour. And hopefully we'll see you again next month, when we're talking about tax. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Went quick.
Yeah, right.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you.